Okay, welcome back everybody to youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology. I'm here once again with Corey Dowds. We're in talk number 3 of 4, series specifically related to relationships and how we look at planets and how they interact with each other between two charts to give us a good idea of how relationships function. So one of the things that we were discussing in between recording, Corey, you mentioned that before we got into the cruel planets, you wanted to discuss how the bodies of planets come together. So say a little bit more about that.
Yes, so in Vedic astrology, we have each sign representing a body type and a limb and everything, but the signs are the bodies of the person, and the planets are like the consciousness of the person. So what's really cool is your seventh lord and your Darakarka will oftentimes be in a sign with your, like, say you have a wife or someone you've dated for a long time, that sign will overlap. So for example, your moon might be your Darakarka and it's in Cancer, and your mate has her ruling planet in Cancer, or her Atmakaraka in Cancer. And this will happen so much, it's astonishing. You know what I mean? With really serious long-term partnerships.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that happened with Melissa and I, whereas her Atmakaraka was in Cancer and my Atmakaraka was in Cancer, and they were very close together. Is that what you're talking about, those kinds of things?
Or even your Darakaraka. Like, so that or the Darakaraka could be there too. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. And so, like, Ernst is Virgo, so his seventh lord is Jupiter, and it's in Scorpio. And Trishti was a Scorpio, I think, you know what I mean? So there's like this overlap of it'll just work really nicely where your seventh lord the sign it's in, or your Darakaraka will end up being in a sign that is that other person's body. You know what I mean?
Right.
And if you want to go even further with it, like, if your Venus is in Aries, you might even meet someone who is like a rock climber, you know what I mean? Or if it's in Capricorn, the sign of marshes, you might date someone who works as a forestry expert in the marshes of the region or something, you know what I mean? These are actual examples.
Would it work such that, say, your Darakaraka, like if your Darakaraka was with the sun, would that attract you to solar types of people like Leos or other sun Atmakarakas?
Yeah, or they might work for the government, you know what I mean? Or they have their own business. And so it's just really cool when you can blend it more than you would expect and still keep blind stuff.
Okay. Sounds like something that, I mean, we don't have time to go over it today, but that sounds like something to discuss in a little bit longer form.
It'd be really fun to do some actual examples with that.
Maybe you can do it on your channel.
Yeah, come over and check it out, you guys. By the time this comes out, might have it up.
All right, so Corey's channel is youtube.com/Eye of the Veda, youtube.com/Eye of the Veda, EYE of the Veda. And by the time this is done, he will have the whole series out for you. So if he doesn't, just go over there and harass him a little bit. All right, so today we're going to be talking about how cruel planets impact each other. And again, I just want to show this brief example here so that we understand what we're talking about. And we used this in the previous discussion with Corey. So what we're looking at here is we have a chart. This is person A's chart, and this is typically how a screen shows up in Kala when you're looking at compatibility. So person A's chart is this outer wheel, and person B's chart is this inner wheel. And one of the things that we can see immediately, just as an example, is we have Mars here in Aquarius, which means that Mars being a cruel planet, Sun, Mars, Saturn, these are cruel planets. This person's Mars is within close enough degree to this other individual's Jupiter that this Mars will be impacting this individual's Jupiter. So we'll just start there. So when you're thinking about a cruel planet such as Mars, and how if it lays over top of someone else's, any of their planets really, what is that Mars going to do to that planet? Right,
yeah, so in the example of Mars is like the fire element. So whatever that other planet that's on top of is going to be putting a lot of heat on it. Now, in the case of Jupiter, it's not that bad actually, because Jupiter likes Mars, but still that person, that Jupiterian person could feel a little more kind of pushed and forced and, you know, hot and hot and bothered. But overall, that's a great one. If you had maybe it on top of Venus, you know, again, it would be like, okay, well, there's more heat, there's more spark in the romance, in the relationship, that can be good. If it's on the moon is like you're generally what you're comfortable with. And so when Mars is on someone's moon, that can kind of be something that you feel like they're a little more aggressive at times. But again, that's one of those interesting things where if your moon is, it depends on your moons. Like if you're comfortable with that in your birth chart, that is not necessarily a deal breaker.
Right.
If Mars is on top of Mercury, that's a pretty interesting one. We could talk about that for a little bit. If Mars is on top of Mercury, then the person who has the Mars there, they'll feel a bit flustered and frustrated by the person's mercurial qualities dancing around the subject 100 times without just going into it. You know what I mean? And so if it's in the house of communication or something like that, or the third house, just something like that. Actually, no, Mercury is always communication. So that's going to happen a lot. If for the Mercury person, they might just feel like, man, they're getting really worked up by me, you know, or they feel a little bit intense. They feel like the communication gets too threatening too quickly when it's maybe not as much. It's more just in their head. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Now, I think those two distinctions you just made. So for the Mars individual, so the person who has Mars, we'll just pick a random person who has Mars in, I don't know, Aries. And then if you've got another individual who has Mercury in Aries, when they come together, the person with Mars in Aries is going to feel like the Mercury individual is too scattered. They're just trying to like get to all these different things. As Corey mentioned, they're dancing around everything. They're not getting right to the point because the Mercury individual is just interested in everything. They're just curious. Whereas the person who has Mercury in Aries, when they get around the person with Mars in Aries, they're going to feel, as Corey said, that things get too hot too quick because that Martian person just wants to get to the point. They just want to focus on it, get in there, get it over with, and that doesn't feel right to a Mercury person. So again, when we learn how each of the planets function, we know when we bring them together in the same sign between two people, that's going to be that dynamic that they experience, right? So, you know, Mercury is more of the foreplay, Mars is more of the screw the foreplay, just get right in there, right?
Yeah.
So if you're more of a Martian type person, you might want to seek out in relationship someone with more of a Martian drive who's just all about it. Or if you're more that needs more time, more interest, more talking, you know, more cuddling, whatever it might be, you get the Mercury person because they want to explore all those little things before if they ever get to it. So, but that's why Mercury's he's a neuter planet, right? He's neutral.
That's true.
So when it comes to things like sexuality and love and romance, that's why they may never get to the point, because for them, it's not about getting to a point. It's not about like Venus or Moon, which is receiving a masculine energy, whereas it's not like Mars, which is about giving that. Mercury is about just the experience, not the point of the experience, if that makes sense.
That's very true and very accurate. I can think of one relationship of a client and situation that is very much like that. And the woman is like, when are you gonna just step up to the plate, sort of, because the guy has Mercury K2 conjunct, so he's like kind of like just a little always too in that Mercury space. So it's like he's not noticing all the signals and everything, and then yeah,
and this is. You know, this is such a wonderful thing to learn, because if you know these things and your astrologer knows these things, you know, before you get in a serious relationship, you can actually sit down and figure out long-term, what are going to be the things that are going to tweak us? What are going to be the things that are going to be difficulties between us? Because you may not recognize them in the very beginning because of the hormones and the endorphins and, you know, all these sorts of oxytocin. But when you are with someone over a long time, your two astrological charts become more and more kind of ingratiated to each other, ingrained. And then these things come out. You know, for example, since we're talking about cruel planets, Saturn and Mars are some of the most difficult combinations between two people. And what I mean by that is let's just say, for the sake of example, someone's Saturn is in, we'll use Capricorn again, but then someone's Mars is in Capricorn. So you've got these two planets in Capricorn. And again, what's the experience they're going to have? It's going to be that intensity of Mars and Saturn. So, when you think about that, when you've seen someone who has Mars on top of someone's Saturn and someone's Saturn on top of someone's Mars, what has been your experience with that? What have you seen with that?
That's definitely one of the tougher ones. And so the Mars person is just going to have that way of triggering and pricking at that person's weaknesses on accident, really, like without trying to. And the Saturn person might try, or like they see Mars as an enemy, so they'll not be appreciating that, and they will intentionally push back a little bit, you know what I mean, in these drier, sarcastic, Saturnian ways, but they'll get that. So yeah, that's a tough one that I would say. But we're talking about these tough placements. I do want to say that, like, one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard about relationships, it was one time I was just working as a grocery clerk in a health food store, and I was front facing all the products, and heard this woman talking to this guy, and I just couldn't help but overhear them. And she was like, doesn't matter that this sucks or that sucks, doesn't matter you have this shit going on, all that matters is that your shit and her shit goes in such a way that you don't prick each other constantly, that you don't get in each other's way constantly. Like, everyone has their issues or their complexes, but as long as they're lined up in such a way that they're not constantly going against the grain with the other person, then you can get along. And I think that's kind of what we're doing with this, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and having a conscious awareness of it is really most important, And when we were again at Ernst's place probably the past 2 years, there was a particular astrologer there that we're good friends, we get along most of the time, but because of where this person's I forget which one it is, but it's either my Mars or her Saturn or her Mars, they're overlapping, and whenever we get together, there's just this kind of like I just want to say critical things all day long, and she just says things, just pushes my buttons all day long, and vice versa. And it's because of this combination. And I like this person. I truly like this person. We are friends, but because of that energy there, I have to be very conscious of it. And sometimes I slip up and things come out of my mouth. I'm like, all right, I'm supposed to be nice, Ryan, be nice. But because of that combination, it inspires that kind of feeling. And that's why, what Corey is saying is so important. It's about knowing that that's the case. That way, when you do get around someone where that's going on, you can realize, no, I am truly trying to keep my mouth shut and not say critical things. But sometimes I can't help it. And the other person realizes that, and I realize that. And so we're able to kind of look past it because we don't have any kind of negative history with each other, which would make that difficult. It's not like, when you have a couple that's been married for 50 years and it seems like they just hate each other because of things that they've done to each other. It's not like that. This is just like a natural energy that people have. And you can have that too with anybody. If as Corey has mentioned, you're working at a store and a client comes up to you and they just rub you the wrong way, more than likely it may be because of how your Mars is situated related to their Mars or their Saturn and so on. So the whole point of this is to give you insights into the fact that unless they have beat you, cheated on you, belittled you, made you feel like a horrible person, done nasty things to you, if they have not done that, yet you feel this kind of intense, sort of criticism because of Saturn, or this intense, like, you should be doing better, idealism from Mars. If you're feeling that, it's probably because of an astrological energy rather than past history, right?
Yeah, definitely. And also, I need to say that, like when I was first getting into astrology, I did kind of feel like, okay, if I just find this right, perfect alignment, everything was okay or whatever. And I think that came from a less healthy standpoint overall. And so, when you're looking at relationships, especially if you have moon starving Venus or something, it's really easy to be like, no one's perfect for me. You know what I mean? And you can't find the perfect one. So you're going to have to kind of be real and settle for something at some level most of the time, unless you just have an amazing chart. But if you're watching this video, you probably don't, because most people that are watching this stuff, we're into psychology, we're into working ourselves, we're on a yoga path. And think about when you get on a yoga path, like if you were to stay with Sri Yukteswar or something, do you really think he's not going to be pricking every little bit of your ego compulsions everywhere, every moment of every day? You know, so like that's a part of life and a part of the spiritual path. So don't try to run from a partner just because of that. And I think that's why a lot of gurus are like, don't worry about who you're married to, just worry about yourself and get right with your consciousness and your issues and everything. And then, you know, you could be with anyone, you know,
Right.
or you can be with the best person. It doesn't really matter. So that's kind of the ultimate goal, I think.
Right. Yeah, I mean, look at Corey and I. I mean, like my Mars and my Saturn nail on his ascendant and his Saturn, and we've worked out our differences.
You didn't have to wrestle one time.
We did, yeah. Yeah, there was some aggression there, but you know, that's part of it, and that's a very important point that Corey brings up. You know, with Mars, we always look at these cruel planets as though they're bad. Sometimes it's okay to just like go take out your aggression on each other if you're doing it in a consensual manner. You know, like if you've got a disagreement and you think the only way we're going to figure this out is if we just go out and just wrestle or whatever it might be, it's okay to use Mars in that regard. You know, there is a sense of healthy masculinity that can be there. And by masculinity, I'm just using the term in regards to like a positive, aggressive type of energy, right? And when we think about these planets, like for example, Saturn, any planet that Saturn's going to be on in someone else's chart, that's going to be the area of life that they're going to feel criticized in or less than in. So if you've got Saturn on someone's sun, or this could apply to either way, if you've got Saturn on someone's sun, they're going to feel criticized based on their achievements and their inspiration. They're going to feel like, oh, you don't really think I can do that, or I should achieve that. If you've got your Saturn on someone's Mars, that's always going to make the person feel like you're criticizing their ideals or their goals. If you've got someone, if your Saturn is on someone's moon, they're always going to feel like you are not understanding them emotionally, or you're too cold and you're too detached, right? So if we think about what each planet means and we would stick that Saturn on that planet, it's going to be that aspect of the person that's going to feel that. And the same thing is going to be true with Mars. You know, Mars is going to come in with its fire, as Corey keeps mentioning, its idealism, its drive, and its will, and it's going to push any planet that it's on. If it's Saturn, it's going to push into their sense of lack, their low self-esteem, their problems with who they think they are. If it's on their Jupiter, it's going to push them to knowledge. It's going to push them to greater understanding. If it's on the person's sun, that Mars is going to support. And that's one the week should talk about here, Corey. If Mars is on someone's sun, it's going to push a person, support them like a general supports a king. It's going to push them to greatness and support that greatness. And so for you, Corey, when you think about like Mars and sun combinations, when you see that between two people, like someone's Mars is on someone's sun or someone's sun is on someone's Mars, how does that typically work out in your experience?
That's one of the better ones because of what you were just saying. It's like the general is right there with the commander, or sorry, the commander is like the same thing as the general. The king, the king and the the knight or whatever are in a close, intimate connection by this relationship. You know what I mean? By putting these together. So that's ultimately a good thing. They're going to go for their goals a lot more, and they're going to be, able to direct their fire in a good direction, kind of like what we said of Jupiter. And, Mars is also like our opinions. I think that's something we should mention too, because we can get into so much trouble in relationships with our opinions. So if you see one of these Mars lining up in a negative way, one can feel like the other person's too opinionated all the time. You know what I mean? Or something like that. But again, with Mars and Sun, that's not so bad because they're both strong-minded and have strong opinions. So if they're together, they're usually going to have more in common than they have.
And it's because they understand each other, right? And that brings us back to just like in the previous talk where we talked about Mercury and Jupiter, how everyone says that's a good combination. And again, for the most part, sure, it is a good combination. But that Mercury actually takes away from that Jupiter, actually starves that Jupiter, because they have different kind of agendas and different kind of goals. But in this situation, we have Mars and Sun. One person's Mars is in Aries, the other person's Sun is in Aries. Well, now we have two dry planets, two directed planets, two planets that are interested in inspiration and getting to the goal. These are two people that when they get together, they can endure hardship to get to the point. They're not interested in comfort. They're interested in success. And so the Mars, as Corey mentioned, being the ideals, the idealism of the general supports the king in his inspiration to rule justly. And that's why someone who has a wonderful Mars, they tend to need to be with like a leader or someone who they can look up to gain inspiration from. And the person who has the sun there, they utilize that Mars energy as sort of like the extension of their will to get things done. So the sun has the inspiration of what to do, but it's Mars that is the will that puts things into action. So that's why in this situation we have two cruel planets, but they're actually can be very good together when they overlap because they mutually support each other because they understand each other.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was thinking about there could be like some negative, like there could be something in a health standpoint where maybe they're too hot around, or you know what I mean? There's two hot planets, so there could be something. Maybe it's a better thing for like a work relationship, maybe than just love overall. Right. But still, great thing overall. Yeah.
And you know the difficulty that could arise. This is another topic, so we're not going to be able to get into it, but. Yes, in general, it's good, but it really depends on what house it's falling in. You know, if it's falling in, if this is falling in, say, someone's 10th house, like your sun is in your 10th house, and then their Mars falls in your 10th house. So now they both have Digbala there, which means that that combination, when you two get together, that's going to support person A's success in status. Yeah. If this was happening, say, I don't know what would be a difficult one. If this was happening in, say, a person's 5th house, well, the 5th house isn't necessarily a house that you want a lot of dryness and will and intention and drive. That's more of a house of grace. So that could bring out more of a fanatic kind of a relationship. You know, so it does matter where these things are, and it does matter a few other things. But overall, what we're discussing here is just simply, in general, what is the quality that people are going to have there. So I think we've given them enough information or enough to chew on around how cruel planets function when they overlap. And next we can discuss Rahu and Ketu and the nodes of the moon in our final segment. But before we do, are there any other thoughts that you have, Corey, anything that came up while we were having this discussion?
No, I guess I would just say that, you know, don't be upset if you see that you have some of these more difficult things. Because really, when you, like I was saying, you're going to face all of these issues one way or another. So the relationship will just help you burn off your karma quicker. You know what I mean? But,
yeah, very good point. That is why we're here, to burn off our karma. So I don't know if I ever told you, Corey, but one of the things I like to tell people is when bad things happen, I tell them to say, well, I'm glad I'm done with that karma. So keep that in mind. All right. All right. Well, it was good seeing you again, Corey, and we'll start up next time discussing Rahu and Ketu in relationships.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Yep.